So, pillar four is how do we assess the EL's progress equitably? So, how can we assess the ESOL students' progress or their mastery of the content? So, if we look at a grade 9 history unit about the Depression and the war, so ultimately the student will have to answer how effectively did the government adjust the effects of the Great Depression for all Americans, specifically Hispanic, African American, and white people, and give specific examples. So if I know that this is what the assessment will be, I need to provide the text, the sources, the graphic organizers, and the scaffolding that will help them to meet this success. So, what is the big idea? How would I summarize the Great Depression? How would I summarize how the government responded to three groups of Americans: Hispanic, white, and African American? And how am I going to make sure that the texts I give them will provide them with what they need to perform equitably on the assessment? So, how am I going to summarize it for my level ones and twos? What will the final assessment be? What will it look like? What graphic organizers? How can I incorporate photos or images or graphs to add meaning? So here would be a simple summary. So I talked about before how do we boil it down for that ESOL 1 student? So instead of a chapter in a book about what the Great Depression was, how can I summarize it as if I were talking to a middle schooler? Great Depression was a difficult time in the United States and in the world. It happened because there was an economic crisis and there was a severe drought in many places. So I'm using very simple language, and even a word like drought, they could look that word up. Many businesses closed, people lost their job, children were hungry and homeless. And then we introduced the New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt, the United States president, and Congress started many new government programs that helped people find jobs, houses, and food. They also helped farms and businesses. However, many Americans, such as Hispanics and African Americans, did not benefit from the programs because of discrimination and racism. So that last sentence is really focused on what the assessment will cover. And notice I add some pictures at the bottom. I even add a little graph. So it creates those reference points so the students know what we're going to be talking about. So I was able to find several websites that did cover the main ideas about the New Deal, the recovery program, what the Great Depression was. However, in our effort to create a more inclusive anti-racist curriculum, a lot of times your modified text, your ESOL text, will not include the specific groups that we're focusing on, or that are Hispanics and African Americans. So that takes an extra job of the teacher to find or to modify themselves the text that will present the experiences of African Americans and Hispanics, which are oftentimes not included in a lot of the mainstream texts. So if the assessment, the final assessment will be, how effectively did the government adjust the effects of the Great Depression for all Americans, specifically Hispanic, African American, and white people? Give specific examples. So if we were to give them some graphic organizer, such as this, where they have to fill out the years, the causes, here is a link here to a Duckster.com. And so they will be able to access some videos. Sorry, this is some videos, so they can have some visual representations of the causes. And then we gave them very specific websites. Now, these websites should lead them to some very specific examples that will help them to answer this question. So for white Americans, we have Duckster.com, which is a modified Lexile level, but they really just cover those major themes. If we want more specific information about how African Americans or Hispanics were affected by the government response to the Depression, we need to use some websites that are not modified, and that it's very difficult to find modified texts already. So what I did was I took these texts, and I have two choices as a teacher. I can modify the whole paragraph and I can rewrite it, or that's a lot of work. And so if I don't have a lot of ESOL students, I can highlight the most important concepts. So instead of overwhelming the student with all of the words, I can find, for my ESOL level ones and twos, I can find some very key phrases that they will be able to use in their assessment. And then the students can just focus on those sentences, either translating them to better understand them or to find meaning. Similarly, this. So the Mexican repatriation was a very important effect of the Depression for Latinos. This is not mentioned in any of the modified texts that are already written for ESOL students. So I just, as a teacher, I will go in here and highlight the most important concepts that they will need. And this is a method of scaffolding. Similarly, the government response to the African American struggle, this is really not addressed in many of the already modified ESOL Lexile levels. And so what we can do is we can go in and we can, as teachers, we can scaffold it by highlighting some of the key things that they would be able to then use on their graphic organizer and then on the final exam as their examples. Similarly here, by just using some red or some highlighting, this will help them to get over the complexity of the reading, and they will get to the main ideas faster. So this is provided by the Social Studies Curriculum Office, and this graphic organizer states it pretty clearly. It gives them the topic sentence that they would need. And then here is a sample rubric that the Social Studies Office has provided, and this is for the ESOL. So we know very specifically, this is dealing with a different unit, but it has very specifics about what a level 1 student should be able to do or a level 2 student, in addition to being able to grade a student on the outline if they're not able to then write a paragraph.